that is the lease for now. And gradually, every month, we'll try as much as possible to take one of the basic contracts and see how we can also clarify it to our people. This is going to be almost on a monthly basis. However, we as 117 Capital, we do a training fee base that if anybody wants a 2 days or 3 days training, we can compress all these particular contracts together with how to structure Sukuk and some other capital market instrument and do it within a 2 days, which anybody that is interested can reach out to 117 for that aspect. But for now, being a free webinars, we are going to be taking contract by contract on monthly basis. So it is going to be just about an hour, maybe hour and a half for us to see how we can try as much as possible to provide basic understanding of each contract for now. Now, all these contracts that I have on the bottom, which is Mudaraba, Musharaka, Murabaha, Istisna, Ijara, Wakala, all of these particular contracts, if any institutions want to raise funds from the capital market through the Islamic finance, can use either of these contracts to issue a sukuk, for instance. Of course, each contract has its own limitations, has its own principles that must be followed, has its own rules and regulations in line with the Sharia that must be followed. So if anybody comes and said he wants to do sukuk and raise funds, but specifically he wants to do a murabaha sukuk, for instance, murabaha sukuk is not a tradable instrument on the capital market, so we have to have a little problem if it is going to have a longer period of time because it's not going to be tradable unless at par. So these are the kind of concern that whoever comes actually must understand. What are the concerns of the investors? What are the concerns of the issuer? What are the concerns of the Sharia? All these ones must be taken care of before agree on which contract to use, like I mentioned. Now let's quickly go to our topic, which is the Ijara. Ijara is usually a lease as we know it, but an operational lease, for instance, the way we are calling operating lease. Ijara contract is the contract for transfer of the use of rock, that is the benefit, which are called manfa'a, of a particular Sharia compliant property or asset to another party in exchange for a pre-agreed rentals amount for an agreed period. So meaning technically, you are only transferring the benefits, the use of rock, the manfa'a of the assets that you have to anybody who wants to utilize this particular asset for a period of time that will all agree between the lessor and the lessee, and also the pre-agreed rental amount that will be agreed between the two parties. All these things must be documented in a contract in order for it to be abiding by each party. So since it is transferring use of asset, not transferring ownership, hence we know in a conventional way, it is similar to operating lease. Although Ijara is considered as operating lease, but financial institutions transfer the ownership at the end of Ijara period, including after they conclude the Ijara contract, but through an independent contract of either sales or of deed of gift, donations, for instance. Therefore, according to Sharia, you cannot put two contracts of this nature together, such as the lease contract as well as the sales contract. You cannot put them together, so it has to be separate. As long as you are doing Ijara, therefore Ijara must stay as long as Ijara, that is as lease, until end of the lease contract, the asset will continue being under the ownership of the lessor. Then after the end of the lease contract, then you can come up with another contract, such as sales contract or deed of gift, and then transfer the legal ownership of the asset to the lessee at the end of this particular transaction. According to a lot of ulamas, of course, assets for Ijara can also be tangible assets which are existing that you can easily see. Is it a house that has already been there and a customer walked into a bank and said, I want to acquire this particular house? Or is it a motor vehicle? You can use it as an Ijara asset, belongs to the bank or belongs to the asset management company, and lease it to the customer, and customer will be using it and be paying rentals. We can also have the tangible assets that are non-existing, meaning they are not existing, but there must be specifications clearly to be spelled out in the contract. So such as the house to be built, If you have to provide, if it is the house that will be built, then all the necessary specifications must be provided, or road to be built. We are very aware about the federal government of Ijara Sukuk, which has been in 2017, 2018, 2020, and the recent one of 2021. They are all related to the asset, but not in existing per se, because the roads have to be renovated, have to be constructed before it is delivered as a lease asset to the federal government of Nigeria. Likewise, schools to be built, for instance, the first public sukuk that we had in Nigeria actually was Osun State Sukuk, and they came to raise 10 billion. They were able to raise 11.4 billion in order to build schools in all the local governments in the state. So meaning schools were not in existence at the moment when the sukuk was issued. So, but at least the proceed was used in order to build that school. So it is tangible asset, but it wasn't in existence at the time of the execution of the sukuk contracts. There is also intangible, which is existing intangible, such as airtime. If any of the providers of the services of MTN, Airtel, and others wants to raise sukuk, for instance, they can use their airtime, because airtime is considered Sharia-wise as an asset. Or educational services. If schools is going to be is existing and it wants to use its services to raise funds, it can also do so. Or a hospital, such as the health services, or employee for wage, because even an employee is considered as an ijara contract between the employee and the employer. There is also intangible, non-existing assets, which are actually in relation to the services that will be rendered in future, but the assets were not readily available, such as educational services, where the facility to deliver such services are yet to be in existence, but will be in existence. You can also do that according to Sharia. We should understand that since we are talking about contracts, as we know in the conventional wording of contracts, there must be some essential elements whenever there is contract. So also in Ijara, there must be essential element. And this essential element, as we know, there must be contracting parties. Contracting parties will be lessor and lessee with legal capacity and all the necessary stands for them to enter into such kind of contract. There must be a language offer and acceptance in a language that will be clearly understood by both parties. They have to also agree on the lease payment, that is the rentals, as consideration to be mutually agreed by the parties. Which currency is it going to be? Is it going to be domiciled, or how is it going to be paid? Is it going to be upfront, or is it going to be advance payment, and some other things? All these ones must also be agreed between the parties. The Ijara subject property must also be known, or benefit use of rights must be Sharia compliant, must be valuable, must be identifiable, must be deliverables, owned or to be owned by the lessor, and must be usable by the lessee. So all these are Sharia issues that must be there for it to actually comply with the Sharia issues, meaning it has to be Sharia compliant. You cannot use an asset that is not Sharia compliant in order to structure an Ijara contract. It must be valuable. Anything that is not valuable, you cannot use it actually for an Ijara contract. You must identify specifically, and that is why even in the federal government sukuk that has been done, the roads that will be constructed were clearly identified and marked as the sukuk roads. You must also be able to deliver it, the sukuk assets. It must also be owned by the lessor, or it will be owned if it is going to be a forward Ijara contract that are agreed. And it is also going to be usable by the lessee, so that the benefit that will be driven will be benefited by the lessee will benefit from it. So in this case, meaning consumables such as food items or money that can be used up cannot be leased out. We have to be very clear with respect to all these aspects, because it's Sharia issue. Asset must be used for the specific purpose only, except if no specific purpose is identified. Specifically, if a house or a car has been leased in terms of the rentals by the Islamic financial institutions to its customer, the usage of that particular car or that particular house, if it is specifically mentioned, must be abided by the lessee, such as a house meant for residential, a lessee is not expected to convert it to either hotel or to convert it to either some other aspect commercially, unless if it is clearly mentioned or it is completely silenced in the contract. Let's look at some of the principles that must be clearly spelled out as far as the Ijara is concerned. First, we should understand that the lease is periodic specific, meaning the Ijara you are going to go into or you've decided to go into are periodic specific. Period of lease must be clearly spelled out in the contract. Is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 1 year? Or is it going to be 7 years? It depends. For Federal Government of Ijara Sukuk, it was 7-year contract that has gone in there. Therefore, we know it's clearly spelled out as a lease period. Rental can be fixed rate or floating rate. It can also be cash or in kind or in services. It all agreed with respect to the Sharia that you can either fix your rate as it is. Maybe you can, if it is periodic specific and you've decided to say you are going to charge just like the federal government sukuk, which is very clearly, very well known in our memory. That is why I'm using the federal government sukuk. Always is fixed at a particular rate. That particular rate is fixed no matter what actually the macroeconomic analysis will go. Or it can be floating rate. But if it is going to be floating rate, the first period of the rentals must be known. The first period of the lease must be known. Then you can decide on what will make it to be floating. Is it going to be 5% increment on whatever you've agreed as a base, or is it going to be after a particular period, say 6 months, we'll come back and sit down and agree on what is going to be the next rate based on the current activities or current affairs of the market? It can all be floated in that aspect. It can also be paid in cash or in kind if it is agreed in the contract to be paid in kind, or even in services, you render a services in lieu of the cash rentals, for instance. Likewise, rental can be benchmark, meaning you can use any index to say that this is the index I want to benchmark my rentals. We've been having so many people asking us, why should actually rental be benchmarked to either conventional interest rate index? However, we should understand that because we only mention it as benchmark doesn't mean that the substance of the transactions is going to be also violated. I give you example, because somebody who is in a particular estate decided to say what I'm going to charge as my rent for my house is going to be benchmarked to my neighbor who is next to me. Doesn't mean actually your house belongs to your neighbor, or because you are different categories you are going to be. Or maybe it's a drink. You have somebody that is doing the Sharia compliant drink, such as malt, for instance. But he decided to say the price of my malt is going to be the price of alcoholic beverages benchmark to it, because that is what is going on within the vicinity. Doesn't mean that the content of your malt is going to be changed to non-Sharia compliant. Yes, it is always better if we can get Sharia compliant benchmark, but in the event that we are not able to get Sharia compliant benchmark, there is no problem in using non-Sharia compliant benchmark as just a benchmark. All risk and liability of ownership, including takaful, which is the insurance of the Ijara asset, are borne by the lessor. Meaning, because we said the legal ownership of the assets belong to the lessor until end of the transactions, so the lessor must bear all the risk and liability in relation to this particular asset, even though the asset is being used by the lessee. The corpus of the lease property remain in the ownership of the seller, that is the lessor. If the benefits from the lease asset is impaired wholly or partially as a result of the lessee's misconduct, the lessee is obliged, of course, to restore or repair the asset. I always want to give example of, for instance, a lease asset that has been agreed to stay specifically in a particular vicinity, and the lessee decided to take it to another place which is not supposed to be. So according to their contract, whatever happens to that particular lease asset is outside this particular contract's terms, then definitely the lessee must bear the consequences in relation to that. But outside that one, it is expected that if it is just for the sake of the other activities in relation to impairment, then the lessor will be responsible for that. The lessor shall only lease the Ijara asset after legally acquiring it, unless on forward Ijara contracts. Meaning, if any customer decided to go to the Islamic bank and request for the financing, and the Islamic bank decided to say, okay, based on your requirements, based on the analysis, credit analysis will be conducted, we prefer to do Ijara Sukuk financing to you. But the bank cannot go and execute the Ijara contract with the customer until the bank actually acquire that particular asset first before it comes and execute the contract. So meaning the bank has to provide some other risk mitigating factors in relation to that, such as undertaking by the customer to say that if you go and buy this particular car, I'm going to lease it from you. And also, if you are going to buy this one, at the end of the lease, I'm going to buy it. All these undertakings are allowed, but not actually to execute the Ijara contract at that particular material time, unless if the Ijara is a forward Ijara, which is Ijara Mausufa fil Dhimma. And because it has embedded an istisna contract, which is another contract for the construction of a building or manufacturing of equipment to be delivered in future. Unless this particular Ijara contract is also Ijara Mausufa fil Dhimma, which has this item, which issues of the istisna attached to it, that is the only way you can execute the Ijara Mausufa fil Dhimma contract with the lessee before the asset comes into being. The lessee may enter into a sublease contract with a third party with the consent of the lessor, meaning if the lessee decided to take that particular asset as a lessee, he can also sublet that particular asset, but with the consent of the lessor. The lessor may transfer the asset, the ownership of the lessee and the ownership of the lessor at the end of the contract, either through the selling at a token or market price. That is, they have to execute a contract after the lease contract as sales contract needed, or may transfer it as a gift or donation, means there must be a document, deed of gift to be provided, or as a gift contingent upon the final rental payment. These are the ways actually the lessor can transfer the legal ownership of the asset to the lessee at the end of the lease contract. Forward lease, like I mentioned to you, Ijara Mausufa fil Dhimma is also allowed. An Ijara contract may be executed for an asset undertaken by the lessor to be delivered to the lessee according to the accurate specifications. This is according to Accounting and Auditing Organization of Islamic Financial Institutions Sharia Standard 9, subsection 3.5 of their Sharia standards. There's also co-ownership. There's also co-ownership is also allowed of the lease asset between the lessee and the lessor. It is allowed. So meaning the house that will be bought by the Islamic bank or a vehicle that will be financed, the customer may also be part owner of it if they've decided to do it as co-ownership between the two parties, between the lessor and the lessee. And the lessor will be the Islamic bank while the lessee will be the customer. The rental amount to be proportionate to the lessor's share of the asset, meaning if it is agreed that a house that will be constructed and a customer has already provided 40% of the total value of the house, and the Islamic bank is going to provide 60%. If there will be 1 million naira as a rental per annum, then it is expected that only 60% of that particular 1 million naira will be paid to the bank as its own rental share in the asset. This is also according to the IOP standard 936. It is also agreed that the lessor, which is the non-interest financial institutions, can also collect arbun, which is the earnest money may be taken in respect of the lease at the execution of the contract of lease. That is mean advance payment. It can be converted as advance payment for the rentals whenever it is executed. It is also permissible security can be collected because there will be rentals obligations that must be paid by the lessee. And as a result of that, the lessor, that is the non-interest bank, may decide to say, I want to protect myself to make sure that whenever it is due for you to pay the rentals, you will also pay it. So give me security. Or if there is any tendency of misuse of the Ijara asset, I want to be covered so that I will use that in order to salvage the situation. It is permissible to have the security in an Ijara contract. No increase in the rentals due to delay in payment, but penalty may be charged to be given to charity, which is another issue. In the event the lessee defaulted or delay in payment of the rentals, it is not expected that the rentals that's supposed to be certain amount to be increased, it is not allowed for such to be increased. However, the non-interest bank can collect its own rentals, and also in the contracts already embedded in the contract that if there is any delay in payment or default, it is expected that the lessee will pay a penalty. However, that penalty, the non-interest bank cannot benefit it, the shareholders of the non-interest bank cannot benefit it, the staff of non-interest bank cannot benefit it, it has to be given out to charity. The lessor may sell the lease asset to a third party, meaning it can be tradable instrument. And that is why the federal government of Nigerian Sukuk that we have at the moment is tradable instrument on the floor of the exchange. Whoever has the Sukuk can contact, of course, his financial advisor or his stockbroker whenever he wants to trade on it or he wants to buy. Sell, lease, and buy back after a reasonable period of time lapse is also allowed Sharia-wise. And this is contained in the Accounting and Auditing Organization of Islamic Financial Institutions, Sharia Standard 9, subsection 8.5. Meaning, if it is lessee who has an asset, he can sell the asset to the bank, and the bank can lease it back to him and lease it back to him for a certain period of time. Then later on can sell it back to the customer. But according to IOFI's section, there must be a reasonable period of time that will lapse before the second purchase of the asset. And that reasonable amount can be time enough that will make that particular asset to transform economically or at least commercially with respect to its benefits. And this is actually the Sharia principle that was used with respect to the sell, lease, and buyback Sukuk structure of family homes that was done in 2021. What is the difference if we've been saying about Ijara? It of course looks like hire purchase. What is the difference between Ijara and hire purchase? We should understand that Ijara contract must be separate with the sales or gift contract. Meaning if you're going to do Ijara, like I mentioned, it has to continue being Ijara alone until end of the transactions. Then you come up with another contract, either contract of sale or deed of gift, which is going to transfer the legal ownership to the lessee. However, in hire purchase or in other lists that we have, it is actually automatic transfer to the lessee. Ijara asset must be utilized on Sharia compliant activities, always from immoral activities, away from immoral activities. Meaning, if any customer approach a Islamic bank for it to buy a truck, the usage of that truck must be, of course, in a Sharia compliant activities. It is not expected that a truck that is usually taking, for instance, alcohol from one place to another, transporting alcohol from one place to another, or pigs from one place to another, are not actually allowed to be used for the Ijara asset. However, with respect to hire purchase, it doesn't have that distinction. It can be used for anything as long as it is commercially viable according to the conventional mindset. Once Ijara contract is executed, the rental stands fixed for the duration of such lease assets. It may change in the hire purchase in the event that some macroeconomic changes, the bank may decide to change it. Risk on Ijara asset are on lessor, not lessee. Like I explained, if there is any risk that will make the asset to be impaired, definitely the risk will be on the lessor, who is the legal owner of the assets. Giving example, a lessee decided to lease a house and they are living in the house, benefiting from the benefits, the use of the house. And all of a sudden, a storm came and take off the roof. Because it is a major activities, from that instance, actually, the lessor must come and salvage the situation and replace the roof, and therefore the risk is already embedded on the lessee. I mean lessor, not lessee. Therefore, lessee is not going to be responsible for such kind of thing, unless if there is violation of the contract by the lessee. If Ijara asset is impaired, like I mentioned, the Ijara is terminated. Therefore, this kind of roof to be taken off immediately. Within that period of the taking of the roof to whenever the roof is going to be replaced for the lessee to continue enjoying, there is no Ijara contract related to that, or at least there is no Ijara asset that will earn return on rental basis, for instance, until actually that roof is repaired by the lessor. The Ijara insurance must be takaful, unless if takaful is not readily available in the environment where that particular Ijara is being structured. But in the conventional hire purchase, of course, any security, any insurance can be taken care of, can be provided. Penalty, like I mentioned, for late payment of rentals from the lessee goes to charity. But however, it is not actually so in the hire purchase. So if we are all talking about this one, let's quickly look at the structure of Ijara Muntahiya Bitamlik structure, meaning this is an asset that at the end of the Ijara, it is meant to be transferred to the lessee at this in another contract dedicated. So if that is the case, here we have, for instance, a customer who approached a bank, an Islamic bank, that he wants to be financed a vehicle. And of course, being Islamic bank has its own checklist. They must do their analysis with respect to their customer. It may be their usual customer who has been banking with them and they know his historical cash flow and therefore can afford to hire a car, for instance. They may, if that is the case, then immediately they will request all the necessary documentations from the customer, the pro forma invoice from the dealer that will be provided, so that the bank will go and acquire that particular house, that particular car, and therefore before they go and give the money to the car dealer, they must make sure that they have undertaken from the client to lease the car, as well as if it is going to end for the sales contract to also purchase the car. So these are going to be unilateral undertaking given by the client to the bank, which is enforceable, which is binding to the client actually if he provided the undertaking. Immediately after all the necessary review by the bank, then the bank will go spot and pay for the car to the vendor, and then will take the delivery. At this material time, meaning the car now legally belongs to the bank, which is a spot transaction. Because it belongs to the bank, as I said, you cannot lease or you cannot sell what you don't own, unless if some other contracts that are specifically away from this particular general rule. So in this case, which is Ijara Muntahiya Bitamlik structure, the bank must own that particular asset legally. So at this stage, the bank owns the asset, and that is when they can come and execute the Ijara agreement with the customer, and then immediately deliver the car to the customer. But of course, there may be a risk here. Is the bank sure that this particular car is the same car that the customer is looking for? In order to avoid any risk related to that, a bank may go into an agency contract with the customer to act as the agent of the bank to go to the vendor, inspect the car, and take delivery on behalf of the bank. And then before the bank deliver the car to the customer. And therefore, the customer now being the lessee of this particular car and the bank being the lessor will continue paying the rentals to the bank in line with the contract that has been agreed. That is the Ijara contract in item 4 that we have. This will continue for the entire period of the lease contract, and at the end of the entire transactions, whether the payment of rentals have already taken care of the total investment by the bank together with the return that the bank is expected, which is mean it is amortizing Or maybe they've decided to say it is only rentals. At the end of the transactions, you are going to pay the entire amount that we will agree, can all be decided at that at the lease agreement. But at least at this stage, what I want to say is that that is when the sales agreement or the deed of donation, the gift, can be provided by the bank to the customer, and that is end of the Ijara Muntahebi Tamlik structure, for instance, which means it is an Ijara, but with the full intention that the asset is going to be legally owned by the customer at the end of the Ijara structure, Ijara transaction. We also have a service Ijara, because as I've been explaining, since we also have intangible assets that can also be considered for the Ijara structure, meaning even the services, like I mentioned, even the employee can be an Ijara structure with respect to that, or even the other services. So if that is the case, here is actually the customer who happens to be a student, or who happens to be a father of a student that wants financing from the bank for his child education, or for his education, and therefore he approached the bank. Because it is a service, the bank has to use another structure, which is a service Ijara, in order to make sure that they have a lease agreement which is going to be executed, and immediately after the bank has already done their credit analysis with respect to either the guardian of the customer or the customer himself, that he has ability to pay as at when due, whatever is agreed, then the bank can decide to go into the contract with the university in order to pay the school fees to this university. And this services now belongs to the bank, but the bank will ask the customer to go and take that particular services on behalf of the bank. And therefore, that is the lease actually the bank is giving the customer, for the customer to go and be taking the education from the university to be delivered. But whenever periodic basis they've agreed, the customer or the guardian of the customer must be paying the rentals to the bank until the end of their agreement that they have in the lease agreement. This is the service Ijara structure in a basic way that we can easily understand it.